Good evening, I'm Isaac Ben Ezra, host and co-producer of Conversations. With me is Bonnie MacCracken. Bonnie MacCracken is a very important person in the circuit that has to do with sales of property as well as foreclosures. And our subject today is the impact of foreclosures on veterans, particularly those who are in active duty. So why don't you start out by telling us what the problem is, Bonnie?
Okay. I'm a land title examiner and I research land records, the title to property in our local registry of deeds. Because of the recent foreclosure crisis, I'm on the front line dealing with the documents, seeing how the banks are foreclosing on people locally. Recently, I've seen how the banks have made mistakes in foreclosing on people. They're foreclosing on wrong property, spelling people's names wrong, spelling the bank's names wrong. We've had over 550 homes here in Hampshire County lost to foreclosure. 16 of those are here in Amherst. Most of them have been, the foreclosed properties are in Ware, South Hadley, Belchertown, and Northampton.
And of course, we're not talking about Hampden County.
No. Hampden County, especially Springfield, experiences 550 foreclosures in 1 year.
Okay, and how did you figure out that there was something wrong with the piece of legislation known as the Valor Act that was being considered by our state legislature?
Well, I've noticed over the years doing reviewing foreclosure documents that we have what's called the Service and Sailors Civil Relief Act of 1940, which is now known as our Service Members Release Act, that it puts an undue burden of proof on our soldiers that when they're deployed, it's their responsibility to notify their banks of their deployment so that the banks will not foreclose on them. That was fine in 1940 when we all banked locally. But in 2011 and 12, we're banking nationally. Our mortgages are held by companies even throughout the world. And this is a really hardship for our soldiers while deployed to notify their banks. To receive the benefits under the Service Members Civil Relief Act, to prevent a foreclosure, it is their responsibility to notify the banks. And as these banks have grown bigger, it's harder for our soldiers to notify the bank holders that they're deployed. And so since the mortgage crisis, it's been about 5,000 soldiers nationwide have lost their homes. And as a land title examiner, I research land records. And I began to realize that if there was some way in the public records that we could notify the banks that this is a deployed soldier, we would take that burden of proof off of our soldiers. And so I began talking with local attorneys and my state representative, Ellen Story, about this issue. And I came up with the mechanism that if we had a declaration of homestead that was amended to include military benefits, this document could serve as that notice. And the banks would receive notice through our public land records instead of the soldiers having to give this notice.
So let's take an example. Soldier is, in this case, in terms of the coverage, the amendment you recommended to Ellen Story and others, is that it's the responsibility of the mortgage company when there's a pending foreclosure action to research responsibility.
Yes, the banks hire attorneys who update the title so that they can give proper notice to the mortgage or the homeowner. And to do this, they search the record to find out who the most current owner is.
Of the property.
Of the property. And they also note any additional encumbrances if there's a second or third mortgage, if there's been a death of one of the homeowners or a divorce. This all goes into a property report prepared by a title examiner or a real estate attorney and sent off to a bank. And so there also is noted if there's a declaration of homestead on record.
So it's the amendment that you advocated that has now become law as of May 31st.
Yes.
Signed by the governor
Yes.
of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts.
He
By the
did.
way, congratulations.
Thank you.
That's significant.
Yes.
It is limited, but it is significant
It is.
because at least it's one more step in trying to deal with how do we bail out homeowners who are either being foreclosed because they don't have funds because they're serving. They get wages in the armed forces that are close to poverty levels.
They do.
And families still need to be supported.
But what people don't realize is the soldiers here in Massachusetts are mostly National Guard and Reserve soldiers. And many of them have high-paying incomes, but when they go and when they become active duty, their salaries actually go down. And so they have a house based on maybe $100,000 income, but then they become active duty and their income may drop by $50,000.
How about 40,000 and 50,000? Are there some of those in the National Guard?
Yes, because that's their salary when they're on duty, and it doesn't reflect what their salary was before. Because people bought homes based on their full-time jobs and their
So the
civilian life.
sacrifice is very clear that they take a hit. And
Yes.
the question, and this is a question that some people ask and some people totally ignore, what is the obligation of the whole society when families are put in this kind of jeopardy and men and women go off to the service and are hit financially and then have new financial problems that are incurred because they have been asked to make this sacrifice on behalf of the nation.
Yeah, and many of them, you know, they were two-income families, and the wife or the spouse has had to reduce their hours to be able to take care of their children, or they incur additional childcare expenses because the other spouse is deployed. And when I proposed this legislation, my own son was deployed in Afghanistan. He is active duty and he is career Army.
Does he own a house?
He owns a house, but he owned a house in Missouri. But I just saw what my daughter-in-law was going through. She was so stressed, she couldn't work full time. She had to reduce her hours to be able to take care of herself and her two daughters. So some days, literally, I was talking with my daughter-in-law and reviewing foreclosure documents at the same time.
So they're not protected because they live in Missouri.
Right.
This is another example of how meaningless some of this activity is in regard to, you know, why on some level it's a federal responsibility, but it's starting apparently with the state of Massachusetts.
It is.
Is it happening anywhere else?
No. This is the
So
first
this is
legislation
the
of its
beginning.
kind.
And it's very limited because it's not just being on active duty. Maybe 10% of the service people are in actual active duty, but could be in. Does that mean they have to be in combat?
Yes.
Is it designed to specifically be in combat?
Deployed.
Deployed and in combat.
I'm not sure in that language for the
Okay.
military, but
what is the amendment to the Valor Act?
It's only when deployed. So
When deployed, which means that they are now in the service of the U.S. government
right.
in some capacity overseas in a war area,
Yes.
or well, that's pretty general.
But for many of our soldiers here in Massachusetts who are Reserve and National Guards, they don't have the same legal services, as active duty, like my son, who is based, he was at that time, he was at Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, and there were legal services that his wife could have sought out. They were not under foreclosure in any way, but I just know that our soldiers and our military families here in Massachusetts do not have the same support system there. It's harder for them to seek out legal help, and they have to pay for it themselves. So if you have a military family here in Massachusetts with a deployed person, you're most often receiving less pay as an active duty military. You don't have the same support system because there's not a nearby military base where you could go seek out legal help at the judge advocate office. And you don't have the same military support structure behind you, other military families. And so this act is very important for soldiers for Massachusetts.
So the amendment only goes so far.
It does.
So somebody who's in the National Guard who's been deployed is in a different status than regular Army.
Correct. But they will benefit from my legislation.
They will benefit.
Yes.
Okay. So that in terms of the major issue, and that is that while somebody is being deployed, that their family, they have the security, they should have the security of knowing that the mortgage company cannot take action
That's
because
correct.
of non-payment.
It protects their home while they're deployed.
But then when they're no longer deployed, they have approximately 90 days.
The Valor Act actually addressed that issue, and I don't have that specific
Okay, but so there
date.
is some additional step that can be taken to forestall foreclosure.
Yes. The Valor Act, I believe, specified what a period of deployment is, and that period starts before the soldier is deployed by, I believe it's by 30 or 60 days, because it's when a soldier is, I guess the term is called up to duty. They have a certain period where they receive retraining and processing. They're in the country still, maybe for 30 or 60 days before they're moved into the war zone or Afghanistan.
So is it fair to say that somebody is deployed and they're back on their mortgage payments and the mortgage company wishes to take foreclosure action, there's some way that they know? How do they know this person is in the military? How do they know this person is in an overseas capacity?
Well, the soldier who's a homeowner
Right.
will record a declaration of homestead, and there'll be something on the homestead form where they will check a box stating that they are a military member.
Well, how do they know they're in trouble? I mean, they don't always know. Sometimes the family is going to say, everything's all right here, take care of yourself, don't worry, we want you to come home healthy, we'll take care of things. And so they get the mail. How do they know that they're entitled to this amendment and the Valor Act?
That's what I'm working on right now. I'm working with an organization called Project Hope, who works with military and veterans, and we're spreading the word. I also hope to start talking in front of some further groups about this. I contacted the Secretary of State's office this morning before I came. I was hoping to have the new form to present to you and to show you and to share with other people. But the Secretary of State has not yet drafted a new declaration of homestead.
Well, what I'd love to get from you, and I'm glad you are moving in that direction, is the information that every military family can have available.
Mm-hmm.
And there ought to be something, if it's not in the act, it's a good idea to go back to the state, since they passed this, to inform with every member of the military by mail that there is a way to deal with this problem, and how to get started with the process,
Right.
so that the advocacy on their behalf works. One of the and that would require one thing that it could be required, and I'm involved in foreclosures in Pennsylvania in the 80s, where we passed a law which required that the mortgage company inform, and this was for the whole population, this was not just for veterans, that they had a process they could go for help that could put a moratorium on and the expenses involved. So maybe you and I'll have a conversation after the show, and we'll put our heads together and
Yeah,
come up with some ideas.
There's a bill, a foreclosure prevention bill, before the House right now, requiring mediation between the homeowner and the banks. I know I have to go home and make my phone call to support that bill.
Okay, so and you want to tell us more about that bill while we're finishing up?
I don't have the specific
Ellen
House
Story
bill.
would have that information.
Ellen Story, just by calling her office and asking her about the present foreclosure bill. I believe it's being discussed.
Would you tell Ellen to call me, and we'll have her on
Oh, okay.
following your show so that we could talk about the bigger picture. But in the meantime, this is new. This is brand new. This is the beginning.
Right.
It's unfortunate that we've had bailouts for corporations and for banks for years, but we somehow haven't gotten to the point where we're bailing out the taxpayer
Right.
for problems that they did not create. And it's unconscionable. It's absolutely unconscionable that this comes at such a late period in time. You know, we talk about the sacrifices that veterans and soldiers make, and we ought to talk about the sacrifices that people who lose their jobs have made to make this country what it is today. And we need to deal with those issues so that we could forestall the problem of homelessness, which is growing and growing and growing. Is there a correlation between losing your home and suicides?
Yes, they're increasing.
You
the
want to tell me
stress.
about that?
Well, just, I've listened to people from No One Leaves Springfield talk, especially about, there's been different homeowners that have talked about their own struggles.
Is that the Operation Occupy Wall Street group?
No, they're their own group, working advocacy group.
And what are they called?
No One Leaves Springfield.
Okay.
And they help homeowners fight the banks, and they also help the foreclosed homeowners stay in their homes after foreclosure. They help to educate people about their rights. And if you ever go to any of their meetings or their seminars or forums, they usually bring a homeowner who's going or have gone through the struggle. And some of their stories where they've talked about how they've tried to deal with banks for over a year, and they can never get to a person who actually has authority to make any decision or to help them modify or change the terms of their mortgages. And some of them, they've just lost their homes because they fell behind because they were sick, and the costs of their medical care. And then even one homeowner, I heard he had a stroke going through this whole process because of the stress. And not only had he was suffering some difficulties before, but then the added difficulties of recuperating from a stroke. And then, so this is all, relating to how the increase of suicide amongst foreclosed people.
Are you talking to veterans groups these days?
I am talking with Project Hope.
And what is Project Hope?
Project Hope, it's a nationwide organization, but we have one in Leicester, Mass. And I've been in contact with Bill Moore, who is helping getting the word out through his own pipelines. But Project Help.
Who is Bill Moore?
He is the head of the Project Hope here in Massachusetts,
Okay.
and they provide a retreat. It's a camp that just allows veterans to get away, be with other veterans, and learn coping skills on how to come back into society after.
Is that funded by?
It's a nonprofit.
It's a nonprofit.
And they're always looking for donations. And Bill Moore has been very helpful with my Valor Act amendment, and getting the word out to other military people. And he hopes to have me down there on his cable show in Leicester, and also to come out to Project Hope to speak to military families when they are there at the camp.
We might, in the minute or two that we have left, also talk about the consequences to veterans and any family that's in foreclosure, and the cost to our society, and the cost to family life and to communities that are at risk because of foreclosure. Children who are about to lose their homes face the possibility of being withdrawn from their schools and their friends. And that in itself creates another big, big problem, which adds stress to the family, particularly to the responsible members of the family, like parents. Parents are besieged not only by not being able to pay all their bills, but are besieged by the social consequences of maybe losing their home. It's the one place where they had some stability. You know, the home is our capital, is our castle.
Yes.
Not capital. It's okay, I'm doing pretty good. But it is our castle. It's,
Yes.
It's our base. We know at the end of the day we go somewhere that's familiar to us. And the people are threatened by the loss of that kind of security. So that there's a community out there that needs to be reached. The people who are still working, the people who are not veterans, we need to bring together and demand, whatever form that takes, whether it's a civic organization or a church group or a political group, we need to draw the line in the sand and say, we're not going to go back to the days of depression, the days of neglect, the days of frustration. And I think your being a part of this has been a wonderful, wonderful contribution to the community.
Thank you.
And are there any final words that you'd like to say to the audience?
Well, the group called Occupy Amherst has recently been in contact with Grace Ross, who is working on this issue. And they are exploring the possibility about moving forward and being an advocacy group for local people who are facing foreclosure.
Well, I want to thank you. I want to thank you very much, and I look forward to staying in touch.
I do.
And we have other players in the community that need to address this issue. So if you're in touch with Ellen Story,
I will.
tell her to get in touch, and we'll talk more about this legislation and future legislation, because we're really just touching the tip of the iceberg. I'm going to close my program tonight. I won't read this whole poem, but it's titled, but I'll read a piece of it. And it's basically a poem about foreclosure by Sterling Brown. And it comes from the Poetry of the Negro from 1746 to 1949. And I'll just read two of the sections. Father Missouri takes his own. There are the fields he loaned them, out of heart's fullness gratuitously. Here are the banks he built up for his children. Here are the fields rich in fertile silt. Of course, we're talking about what happens when rivers overflow and create all kinds of flooded conditions. It's a form of foreclosure for the farmer because everything that he's hardly has worked with is now being threatened. But the threat is nature, and nature, we have to learn to live with nature. But the threat that we have today in this depression that we're in is man-made, created by what I would call the greed society. And we have the resources today to bail out the banks, and we've got to turn this around and tell our politicians it's time to bail out homeowners and taxpayers, and to put our future in our children by resources for more education, for more opportunity, for safe housing and the like. So I want to thank you very much once more.
Okay.
And it's been a pleasure, and
Thank
good
you.
luck, and I look forward to seeing what you do with this.
Well, I figure my job as an advocate for this legislation is not over until I see my first soldier record their declaration of Homestead Act at the Registry of Deeds. So I will keep you posted about that.
And we need to bring the taxpayer and the soldier, and sometimes they're the same people, together, because the bigger issue is that we need to have everybody safely in a home of their own, or an apartment that they can afford. So I guess we're coming to the end of conversations for now. I want to thank the students who are behind the cameras. I want to thank the staff here at ACTV. And I'll see you next week. You can count on it, I think. Good night.
Good night.